Hey guys, it's Known. Welcome to another episode of You, Me, Empathy. My name's Known, and I am the creator and host of You, Me, Empathy, a podcast I love, and I hope you love too. Today's episode 3, I chat with my friend Tony for the first installment of Tony Time. Tony Time. Tony Time is... These segments will be separate episodes where I chat with my friend Tony, who is a therapist, about the previous week's topic and exploring that topic from his perspective as a therapist and how it pertains to his relationship with his patients. And by that, I mean, how does he talk to his patients about that particular topic? So this week, I'm talking to Tony about how he talks to his patients about the subject of grief. We also explore just some of the things that Benjamin and I talked about in episode 2. If you haven't listened to that, do go and listen to that. It's a really great episode. Benjamin is just a beautiful human, and he has a lot of wonderful things to say. So I hope you enjoy this episode. The disclaimer portion is that Tony Ramynke, my friend Tony, is a California licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed by the Board of Behavioral Sciences, license number LMFT 47805. As you know, he's a regular contributor to You, Me, Empathy, but he is not functioning as a marriage and family therapist in this environment. You, Me, Empathy is a podcast for informational and or entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Okay, enough of that. I hope you enjoy this episode. I love you guys. Bye!
La la la, you, me, empathy, yeah, la la la.
Welcome to episode 4 of You, Me, Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this overwhelming and magnificent pale blue dot. This is episode 4, but it's also the first time that we're doing Tony Time.
Tony Time.
You guys met Tony in episode 0, the intro episode, and Tony, these episodes will come in between the regular, not the regular, that's not the right word, but my interview episodes with guests. And so for those topics where Tony feels like he can provide some insight from a mental health professional's perspective, we will do those episodes separately, and they'll come a week after the episode. So this is episode 4. We are talking about grief. But before we do that, let's hear a little bit about Tony.
Well, hello, Known.
Hello.
Good morning. I think I just heard you call me irregular, if referring to the regular episodes.
Well, but you do need to eat your prunes.
I know. That's what every good doctor tells me. Well, hello, listeners. Yep. If you listen to the intro to the very first podcast, my name's Tony Ramynke, technically Anthony Ramynke, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California and a good friend of Known's. And he approached me with this wonderful idea of doing a podcast on the issues of mental health and specifically looking at and talking about all kinds of really, cool topics, again, that are very, very, very much a passion of mine and a reason I went into this field in the first place. And he just wrapped up a wonderful, wonderful, amazing interview with Benjamin Dewey, who I've had a chance to listen through, and I just was so excited to come and be able to maybe contribute a little bit more to that on a mental health professional's perspective and on grief and loss. And I thought you guys came up with, I thought you really came up with a wonderful spectrum of topics as the two of you really processed what grief and loss is to, and specifically to the two of you, what it was and what your experiences have been. So I'm curious, what was that like for you? Being able to hear Benjamin's story, but talk about your own. And
Yeah, I've spoken with Benjamin previously. He was a guest on Joy Sandwich, and he is the type of human that I kind of aspire to be in some respects.
Right.
He's very, as you listeners know, he's very eloquent. He's very well read. He's a science geek, and he, sort of has this repository of just quotes and knowledge from Dawkins and Sam Harris and Carl Sagan and all these Joseph Campbell, all these heroes of his. And so to answer your question, it was delightful. I just enjoy hearing him speak, and we talked about grieving over those in our family who, have either abandoned us or have made the relationship difficult in some ways through their relationship with religion.
Right.
Which is something that I've had a hard time with for a long time. And it was nice to relate to Benjamin on that particular topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and listening to you too process this big topic. I mean, grief and loss is such a big topic. I think we tend to think about grief and loss, related to death, the actual death or loss of somebody. But I think what I see as a mental health professional and, what I've read and, and learned is, there's so many things that we can lose or not have that really trigger this grief and loss response, not similar to that of when we, have lost potentially a loved one. And I think the thing that, there could be varying degrees of a response, and that's, something we'll talk about, is that there certainly can be varying degrees of emotional loss and feelings that may come up for us as a result of the type of loss that we've experienced. But that, to your point, losing a parent because of an ideology or, losing a parent because of a belief system and not being able to have a relationship or the type of relationship that you would desire to have with this person because of an ideology, that could promote and bring up so much loss and so much grief, again, because you're losing a relationship.
Yeah.
And, and I know that's something you and I have even talked about personally, and you've shared with me. And I know the difficulties and the struggles and the stresses that has come with that. And, it's a very real thing. So again, this idea that grief and loss is just simply not about losing somebody through death.
Yeah. It's so many things. And one, there's a word that Ben had mentioned during the episode, and he said impermanence.
Right.
Which sort of struck me as profound and something that is very much related to grief, in that change, right? We can grieve change in as you're saying, a variety of forms and a variety of levels of sort of emotional input and all those things. Like there's so many ways that we can grieve, and the impermanence is sort of like the universal one, right?
Yeah.
We all have to deal or experience change in our lives. Personally, with our relationships, things change. I have to wipe my butt more.
Right.
I have grayer hair. Sorry, that was gross. But, just change. Even on and one thing I wanted to mention is change, even though we always sort of, or society seems to say that and I say sometimes we gotta be okay with change. We gotta, change is good, change is positive, change. But we also have to recognize that it's hard.
Yeah.
It's difficult. And even the small stuff, and all of that's valid. So that was one of the takeaways with my conversation with Ben, is the sort of the impermanence part of grief.
Yeah, I love that too. I loved when he used the word impermanence, because you're right. I think that is all of our existential existence. As you mentioned, being on this big blue rolling pebble that we're all
Pale blue dot.
Pale blue dot. Wow, I chopped
That's
that.
a Carl
pretty bad.
Sagan.
Is it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, give credit where credit's due.
How'd you describe it?
Yeah. What did I say? This
Blue rolling pebble. That works too.
Does that work too?
That works too.
All right.
Those are all synonyms.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like it.
So, I picked up, I slaughtered Carl Sagan. Sorry, Benjamin. I know you love Carl Sagan. I apologize for that.
He'd be okay with that.
Would he be? Oh, okay, cool.
The ethos was there.
The ethos, the meaning.
Yeah,
I mean, I had the best of intentions.
Yeah.
But no, I love that. And I love Rush. I love Neil Peart, the writer for Rush, and the band, for those of you who may not know who Rush are. But in one of the songs, Neil references a line or a lyric. He writes that changes aren't permanent, but changes. And to me, that really kind of summed up what Benjamin was talking about, and just this idea that life is change. I mean, that's part of our human condition. That's part of the membership fee of being a human being. And but coming back to empathy, this podcast's main topic to some degree is this idea that to empathize with each other about how difficult that struggle can be, and whether it's a small change, whether it's graduating high school and going into college, whether it's moving out of your parents' home for the first time, whether it's a divorce situation, whether it's a loss of a parent through an ideology or a difference in belief, whether it's the loss of a child, a spouse, a parent, a grandparent. These are all the type of changes that most of us would prefer not to have.
Yeah.
I mean, change is hard. Change is difficult. And as much of the fact that it's a absolute 100% part of our existence, it's a very difficult process generally.
So how do you prepare or talk to your patients about grief, and then sort of the follow-up to that is, how do you have conversations about change? Like, are those, and how do we cope with change or cope with grief? That's like 5 questions.
Sure.
Answer them all in order.
Give me a 2-minute. Please follow that up with 2 minutes of information. No, you're right. I mean, there's a lot there, but those are great questions because, I think when somebody comes into a clinical office and generally they're in a high level of stress, maybe because something like this just happened, maybe there's a change that's occurred and they're really, really struggling to deal with what's happened, what's occurred in their life. One is I can meet them where they're at emotionally. I mean, I can validate their feelings. I can normalize the experience that they're going through, but also to talk about what Benjamin was talking about. I don't have to so over empathize with them that we're both crumbling on the couch. That's not the point. The point is for me to be able to validate their experience, hear them, and know that they're understood by me through through the empathic attunement and the empathy, and yet at the same time, give them a sense of hope. And give them a sense of lack of a better term, normality, meaning that a lot of people come in, maybe this is the first time they've ever experienced like this, maybe it's the most difficult thing they've ever experienced, but being able to instill a sense of hope by letting them know that there are ways through what they're going through, and letting them know that there are tools and there are interventions and there are resources. I mean, basically say there is hope. You are going to get through what you're going through. And most people, if they've come into a clinical office because they're struggling to get through something like this, feel hopeless.
Yeah.
And so being able to let them know that there is a way through this and that they're going to be okay. And once we've done that and we're working a little bit further down the line, it's really about growth. It really becomes about, that loss is a part of this existence, a part of our human existence we've talked about. And a lot of times, as unwanted as it is, and as difficult as it is, if handled properly and worked through, it really can become part of our growth. And we will eventually learn how to integrate the loss, no matter, how dramatic and traumatic. And again, a lot of times we would not ever want these things to happen, but we can't stop them. And that's the point. But we can grow from them and we can integrate the loss over time.
As a therapist, how do you, because going back to my conversation with Ben, I was explaining that I struggle sometimes with sort of probably being overly empathetic, right? He used the word rational compassion,
Right.
which is a term he got from Paul Bloom, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
But it made me think about how I can sort of overwhelm myself and overwhelm my senses, and in an effort to help people,
Sure.
the motivation's right, but I sort of overdo it, and then I'm not, the self-care gets thrown out the window, right?
Right.
How do you, as a therapist, like draw the line? I mean, as a therapist and then as just a human, like how do you get to the point where you're providing the right kind of empathy and then stopping, allowing them to do the rest? How do you do that?
It's something that's just learned over many years. In the beginning of being a therapist, it was extremely difficult to know that boundary. And I think I put myself into not early burnout, but maybe overly compassionate to some degree, and not knowing how to develop that muscle, so to speak. And over years and years and years of working with people, I've learned to develop that. So, very much a learned thing. And I encourage most people to do this, the same thing, because, to Benjamin's point, I can't be a help to anybody else if I'm not in a good place. I mean, it's not going to work. So my level of self-care is going to be, exceptionally important for the type of care that I'm providing others. And that's a huge point that I think we all need to think about in our relationships and the work that we do. Is we've got to be in a good place. I mean, first and foremost, what's that, old adage, or not old adage, but the, I'll tell you what it is and you can tell me what the word would be. But I love this because it's so applicable to this process. They always tell you when you're on an airplane, if everything depressurizes, the oxygen mask is going to drop out. And for the parents, have the parent put on your oxygen mask first and then put it on your child, because your first response is going to be to want to protect your child. It's just to automatically put it on your child. But if you pass out, then you're gone, and your child's gone, and you're useless. So
you have to take care for yourself first. And if you're not taking care of yourself, then you have nothing to give.
Exactly.
Nothing to give, yeah.
And in that life or death situation, that really punctuates that point that, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first if you're going to be good for anybody else. And I am really, learning that myself. I'm really integrating those self-care principles and learning to, eat well, sleep well, properly exercise, set boundaries when necessary, and to make sure that I am compassionately caring for people in the right way, because I'm in a good place and I have something to give.
Yeah, I like it. I dig it.
You dig it?
I dig.
All right.
So what are some, obviously emphasizing hope, what are some takeaways for the listeners, like maybe someone who is experiencing some grief right now? What are some ways for them to cope with that grief?
Well, the first thing that I keep wanting to come back to when I think about what I would say would be uncomplicated grief or loss is really to be compassionate and understanding with yourself, meaning you're going to go through a flood of emotions and a myriad of emotions, and you can have anger, and you can have sadness, and you can have low mood, low affect, we call it. And, and just maybe very unmotivated some days. And then maybe even later that same day, you may find yourself being happy for a little while, and then you may stop and feel guilty for being happy, or you may want to judge yourself for having a particular emotion. And one of the things that I always want to instill in people is really try not to judge whatever it is you're going through emotionally. Try not to judge your feelings. I really believe, the feelings within themselves are not wrong, but they're great messengers. And if we listen to our feelings, we'll get wonderful information about what's going on inside of ourselves and what is it that we may need to do at that moment. If I'm feeling exceptionally down, then it's probably a wonderful time for me to get on the mountain bike or go out for a run, or, go to the gym and do something physical, which usually really, really, really helps me. And so I really want people to listen to their feelings. And again, don't judge, don't judge whatever feeling is coming up for you. Don't judge happiness. If in some point in your day, a lot of people have talked about they feel guilty, for instance, if they're working through a bereavement, and at some point during the day, they feel happy, that there's a tremendous amount of guilt about that. And no, I mean, happiness is a part of our existence, and it's good to be happy for a few moments. That's not disrespectful, to the person whom you've lost.
I mean, if you killed the person and you're happy, then that's another thing.
we may need a psych eval.
Yeah,
and
but
and a different form of intervention. But yeah, exactly. But normal grief, it's not uncommon. And so, I really, when I work with somebody clinically, I really don't want them judging what they're feeling, and I really want them to be more compassionate and understanding and open. And I just say, just kind of be an investigator to your own experience, and listen to what's coming up for you. And the big part, though, I would say, is beyond that. If people are really struggling, if the grief is prolonged, if things are getting worse over time, if you're finding that your symptoms are really increasing, that it's, as the days, the weeks, and the months are moving on, you're really having a very, very difficult time getting out of bed, working, basically, self-care, brushing your teeth, and you seem to be going in the opposite direction from working through your grief and loss, that, that's probably the time that somebody would want to consult with a mental health professional. Because, at that point, it sounds like somebody might be moving into what we would call complicated grief, or potentially a major depressive episode where, more interventions would be required. If you're feeling, suicidal, if you're having, homicidal, suicidal thoughts, if you're having, if you're moving into, substance abuse and substance dependence, and you're moving into, high levels of distress, the impairments in functioning, then you really want to seek out a mental health professional with, soon as possible.
Yeah. I mean, even on I would say the early stages of grief, I would recommend therapy, because I know therapy for me personally has helped me better understand my feelings, better have insight into my emotions and the actions associated with those emotions and feelings, because I was so shut off from them for so long, It took me it's almost like I opened the gate and then I had to build a new bridge, right? And the therapy helped me find that bridge, help me build that bridge to those emotions. And once I got to them and, walked along that path toward them, I was able to I was able to almost look at them from a 360 perspective. I'm having a bit more insight into why I'm feeling certain ways. Because sometimes a lot of the time, it can be overwhelming and it's hard to even know and understand how do we connect with our feelings,
Absolutely. And, sometimes people come in and they talk about just this kind of big fog that they feel like they're in, and they know they don't maybe feel well, but they don't really know why, even if something, significant has happened around them, but they still feel somewhat detached maybe from the experience, or they don't have the words, or they don't have the insight, or they don't have the clarity to put maybe to words, or to put towards an insight or an understanding about their experience. And I think in those cases, therapy can be extremely helpful to help people make sense of, in a sense, what they're going through, help them get rid of the fog and get a sense of clarity or a sense of understanding. And I think, we all come to every experience with a history. We come to every experience or loss with a myriad of human experiences. And I talk about templates. Each one of us has a relational template of how we view ourselves, how we view others, how we view ourselves in relationship. And I think this can become very complicated when we've had a loss, and particularly a significant loss. And we may find ourselves in that fog, and we may find ourselves without words, and we may find ourselves without clarity or understanding. And I think, a mental health professional can really help guide us in that process of understanding and really getting rid of the fog. And for some people, it's extremely helpful. For others, it's not so complicated, and other people seem to be able to put to their experience the words that they want to have and to express the meaning and the emotions to which they're going through. And some have wonderful access to their emotions and can heal wonderfully without a therapist's help. And so I don't always think that therapy is necessitated. A lot of people can go through a very, what we would call, and this is a horrible word, standard or normal, grief process without any kind of intervention, just with the support of family and friends.
Yeah.
And yet others will really benefit.
Yeah.
You know, others can really, really benefit. And I think it just depends on so many factors in a person's life and where they are when something like this occurs. And so it's, you know, this is where I think it can become a complicated process. But again, it always comes back to if you're feeling overwhelmed and you don't know what to do, and maybe there's extreme feelings of hopelessness and you're experiencing impairment in life's basic forms of functioning, then it's, you know, probably really important to get into therapy. And to your point, Noan, even if you just feel like it would be beneficial, you know, more where you were at, like I wanted to be able to process, I wanted to be able to talk to somebody about it, I wanted to make more sense. You know, I know for you, that's been a wonderful, wonderful process in helping you through this. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and just having, you know, you mentioned family and friends, like just having people in your life who are, you know, loving and compassionate and open to like listening, you know,
Absolutely.
like that's a huge help. So have those people in your life, not the opposite of those people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, I mean, we're social creatures and we really regulate one another socially, relationally. And, you know, to isolate could potentially be a very bad thing. You really don't want to isolate because, you know, then you're really not getting the emotional support that you need potentially. And so it's important not to isolate yourself and to be in a social environment and hopefully with a lot of understanding people. And if not, it might be helpful to maybe seek out a group experience. You know, there are a lot of different types of groups. There's, you know, grief recovery groups as well. And they're not just about bereavement. Some are, but not all are. And you might be able to find a lot of support in an environment like that. And, but, you know, I think it's important to really get that social, you know, positive social experience. And, you know, unfortunately, I get it. Some people may have to work really hard to identify good, healthy social support. You know, we don't all have healthy people around us, unfortunately, or healthy friends or healthy family. And that's difficult. So we may have to work hard to seek that out.
They have me empathy.
But they do have me empathy. And that's a awesome place to start. And I'm so glad you're listening. And as known is. And, but there might be...
I'm not listening.
Did you check out a few minutes ago?
I checked out.
All right.
That was good.
So, but if you need, but if, you know, good chance, although this is a wonderful podcast, you may need more than me empathy.
Well,
then,
also, I'm creating the me empathy Facebook group.
This is true.
So that will be a place for... I'm not saying me empathy is the cure-all for everything. I'm not saying that. I'm not a mental health professional. Tony is saying that. No, I'm just kidding. But if you guys do want to go check that out, I haven't created it yet as of we're recording this, but it will be up by the time this episode is out. It'll be a place, just an extension of this podcast for people who want to talk further about stuff and connect. And who knows, maybe even Tony will pop up in there from time to time. Who knows? We haven't figured that out yet, but I think that's a good sort of breakdown of grief from Tony Time's perspective.
Well, thank you. I hope so. It was certainly enjoyable. And, you know, and maybe one other thought takeaway, I was just thinking about this, was, and it maybe goes back to that idea of not judging our grief and our experience of what we're going through. I had a friend, actually, and I love this story because it's so well illustrative of loss and grief. And this friend came to me, you know, knowing obviously what I do and just wanted to talk to me about this kind of non-professionally, but just, you know, but also just as a friend, and said, you know, I'm just so struggling because, you know, I recently went through 2 losses and I'm feeling horribly guilty. And I'm like, well, you know, what happened? You know, what's going on? And this person described that she had lost her father and she had also lost her dog kind of within, you know, like a month's time of each other.
Oh, wow.
And you know, and I said, you know, my gosh, I'm so sorry, you know, and she, you know, thank you, very sweet. But she said, but I'm dealing with a tremendous amount of guilt. And I said, you know, and I said, of course, you know, well, maybe you need to go in and see somebody to really talk about that with. And she says, well, I don't know, you know, because what I'm feeling guilty about is I lost my dad, but I really don't feel anything regarding that loss. But I lost my dog and I feel horrible. I'm just emotional, and every day I walk in the house, I just sense that emptiness and that sadness, and I feel so guilty. And I just, you know, said like, well, what did you lose when your dad passed away? And, you know, she shared, well, I didn't lose really much of anything. We didn't have much of a relationship, really hadn't my whole life. And the times we did, it really wasn't good. And I said, okay, so I don't know, how'd you feel when you lost your dog? Oh my gosh, when I lost my dog, my best friend, I lost, this wonderful, love and acceptance, and I was so excited to come home every day and be greeted by this just loving, fun dog. And I'm like, wow, okay. I said already, I hear how much you've lost by your dog passing, and I didn't not hearing a whole lot about what you lost when your dad died. And you kind of see the light bulb go off inside of her head, like, oh.
Yeah.
So it's the idea. It's really this idea of what are you losing? What have you lost? And I know you and Benjamin kind of referenced that when you were talking about it. It's what's gone, right? What do you no longer have that you valued? And I know Benjamin was talking about that with his dad. That there was a tremendous loss there when he lost his dad because of who his dad was to him, and it was obviously somebody that he really, really meant a lot to Benjamin, and so I think sometimes evaluating our losses in terms of what they meant to us is important versus what we think we should be feeling.
Yeah,
kind of thing. So
no, I like that a lot. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you to Tony, my friend Tony, for the first iteration of Tony Time.
First iteration of Tony Time in the books.
I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, this will be Tony and I will do Tony Time.
Wow. we have to come up with something else.
We have our private Tony Time, and then we have this public-facing Tony Time. I'm just kidding. We will have the Tony Time episodes in between my guest interview episodes, so look out for those, and thanks for listening. Be sure to follow Yumi Empathy on Twitter and Instagram at Yumi Empathy. And if you want to check out my story, The Day I Stopped Eating, that is on my website at knownwells.com. I am in the process of creating a Yumi Empathy website, so that may be out by the time you listen to this. Who knows? Things could change. The world could blow up. You never know. Again, I'm creating a Facebook group, so check that out. I'll have links for that in the show notes for this episode. And if you want to be a guest or contribute in some way to the show, reach me at yumiempathy@gmail.com and leave me some ratings and reviews. 5 stars is my favorite number. I don't like 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, so only do 5. Just be honest. Just be honest. If you go 4, that's fine. Just, make sure you give some good reasons.
Wow, do you hear the pain in his voice?
Oh my gosh, I'm so desperate. Anyways, thanks for listening. And to close it out, thanks again for listening. And as always, I'm here. You're here. We're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring, rolling blue pebble.
Pebble.
We have each other. It's Yumi Empathy.